off some lasagna and dessert upstairs, but let me welcome you to our midweek Bible classes. And Kirk Finley tells me we're back up and running on the live stream. We had stopped that for a few weeks, and then we began to see some numbers go up of folks who were confined at home, and so he is starting that back up tonight. So y'all be on your best behavior, and we'll continue in our study. A couple of congregational announcements, and then we do have some updates to people on our sick list. Our Grief Share class that was suspended this past Sunday because of inclement weather will be back up and going this coming Sunday afternoon beginning at 2 o'clock. Tim Nichols, Brad Howard, of course, are facilitating these sessions. There are flyers that are still available at the tables as you come into the auditorium if you'd like more information, or if you know of someone that could benefit from it. People can also go on the church website where they can find out more information about this series of classes. The Young at Heart Banquet is still set for February the 13th, Sunday, immediately after morning services. All members aged 60 and up are invited. If your spouse is not 60, they, of course, are welcome to come with you. And if you're unattached, you may bring a guest. You can call or email the office, or there's a sign-up list on the bulletin board. If you go to the online directory, you may use the calendar in the online directory, or sign up on the church website if you plan to attend. This is a big event, and we didn't get to have it last year, so we're excited about being able to have that again. So please take note of that. Reminder about the parking over here on the Brown Street side or even on Gunter Avenue, that you not park within 30 feet of the intersection, and don't use both sides of the Brown Street for parking. We have plenty of parking on this side of the building, and it's safer, and it's thankfully, Jimmy, I don't think we have that many folks that park across Gunter Avenue anymore, but for a while. Well, I mean, you're the security guy, but we would put. Okay. Okay. That's exactly right. Okay. Right, only one on this side of the Brown Street side, yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, the last thing we need, in fact, there was a wreck here back last spring, and it happened to be one of the city transportation buses that tried to come across and got T-boned. In fact, our camera was, evidence that they pulled to use. It's, yeah. And I don't know what it is. And on Sunday we have a police officer at the top of that hill because people, and maybe you've done it too, you come through the intersection there right past the Methodist Church, and when you top that hill, it's almost like, boom, you just, you don't have another red light until you get down to, past. Good. Well, that's yeah. Right now we've got adequate parking. So just be mindful of that. The last thing we want is for there to be an incident that would involve an accident or anything like that. Alan and Kathy Collins have requested some help this coming Saturday. They are in the process of emptying out her late mother's home, and there's considerable stuff that they need some help with. A lot of it, John Finley was telling me, a lot of it is just bagging it up and taking it out to the end of the driveway. But if you can help with that, meet here 9 o'clock Saturday morning. They're just going to meet here and probably get one of the buses and head that way and help Alan and Kathy with this. And they both are on the backside of the COVID. And but if we could help with that, I know they would appreciate that. So 9 o'clock this coming Saturday morning. Let's see. As far as our prayer list is concerned, we do have several people that are confined at home, battling this particular strand of COVID. In fact, James Dudley and I were looking at the list, and this is just what we know about people who have had it or currently have it. We're at about 27, but as far as we know, of that number, none of them have been in the hospital. Vicki Law is the only one that was in the hospital, and hers was because of the flu, but she is now at home. So, but we've got a bunch of people who are confined at home, and so continue to pray for them. It's really strange because we've had situations where a spouse would test positive and the other would never get it. We've had other incidences like Jason and Holly Rogers. All of them got it. The entire family. So it just depends. So, but we want to continue to pray for them that they'll continue to see improvement. And it's good to have Andre back. This was your second round, wasn't it? Yes. Okay. All right. Well, maybe that's it. So, I mean, it's good to have somebody that can kind of tell the rest of us what it's like, I'm just picking at you. Brent's on security, but Susan, of course, Susan Lusk had knee replacement surgery 2 weeks ago, I think today. Was it 2 weeks ago? Guys, did y'all not have that in the prayer? I think it was 2 weeks ago today. Still doing good, going to therapy, and hopes to be out and about. Might have been here this past Sunday if the weather had not been so uncooperative, but continue to remember her. Teresa Cooper has requested prayers for her sister, Dean Bodine. She is in the hospital currently undergoing test. I asked Kirk Finley about Tyler Flack, the junior from Arab High School. He is in his 8th day at Well, I don't know how I turned it off. When did I go out? Just now. Do what? Yeah, it's blinking, and I don't have any more batteries. I took them out of this one. No good, because when I come up here, everybody automatically goes to sleep. So, no good. They think it's Sunday morning. So, all right, we'll adjust and go accordingly. Yeah. All right, wake back up. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Jimmy. And thank you, Kirk. Let's see. Anybody else that we didn't have? Guys, anybody I need to mention as far as the sick list? Okay. We're just going to continue Greg Driscoll, Dr. Darnell, and others are monitoring our situations. If there were to be any changes, of course, we would let you know that just as soon as possible. But right now, we plan on continuing our current format and current schedule. So let's begin with prayer tonight and be mindful of those who are still having to battle this thing. Father, we do thank you for the beauty of the day, mindful of some more potentially inclement weather tomorrow, and we certainly pray for everyone's safety. We are keenly aware, Father, of a large group of our people that have or are currently dealing with this next bout with the COVID, and we certainly pray for them that they would continue to show improvement and would be on the road to recovery just as soon as possible. There are others that are recovering. We pray for Vicki Law and for Susan Lusk. Pray for Dean Bodine that sufficient answers might be found for the difficulties that she's having. Likewise, Father, for Tyler Flack, and that they might be able to put together a plan that would put him on the road to recovery as soon as possible. Go with us tonight as we study, as we turn to your word, because we know it's within the pages of your word that we read and are exposed to the issues of life. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, we are going to the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews tonight, and probably we've kind of been leading up to this. Now, there are some really, major points throughout this entire letter, but when we say the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, we are privileged, I think, to deal with one of the great, truly outstanding chapters, not just in the book of Hebrews, but in the entire Bible. Sometimes people will say, well, you think about why did Paul write, and keep in mind chapter divisions are not original, but you think about the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, how much more we know about the resurrection, because Paul devoted that much time to that, or maybe before that, 2 chapters earlier, the chapter on agape love in chapter 13. And it's, we have that. Of course, it's all important. It's all outstanding, but there are just some that stand out for any number of reasons. So when we get to this chapter, I think it's crucial, and I didn't point this out last week, but if you look at the end of chapter 10, there are two things that the writer mentions. Verse 36, the Revised Standard says, for you have need of endurance, so that you may do the will of God and receive what is promised. You've got that word in verse 36, and then verse 39, we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but are of those who have faith and keep their souls. I like the other renderings better than the RSV here. A better one is, we are of those who are faithful. That seems to be a little more accurate. And so you've got endurance and faithfulness. Now look at chapter 12 and the beginning of that, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us cast aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with, endurance. Let us run with endurance. And looking to Jesus, the perfecter, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So, the end of chapter 10, you've got endurance and faithfulness. beginning of the 12th chapter, you've got what? Endurance and faithfulness. And so chapter 11 is pretty well bracketed between, with those two concepts. The key ideas that kind of put parentheses around this 11th chapter. Endurance and faithfulness. And that's his point is this kind of faith endures. It doesn't shrink back. It doesn't fall off, if you will. It endures in the midst of difficulties, in the midst of trials. Faith journeys on. Faith is what is sustainable in that regard. James Dudley mentioned, and if you're reading Power for Today in the quarter, the winter quarter, today's devotional mentioned the fact that in the book of Hebrews, every chapter, all 13 chapters, start with a significant word. And the 11th chapter is certainly no exception. I mean, you go back chapter 10, 4, now, chapter 9, now, and that's the same word that's used here in first verse of chapter 11. So it's a significant part of the book of Hebrews, despite the fact, and I probably wear this concept out, but I think it is important. Chapter divisions are not original with the autographs. That came a little bit later. And so the writer brackets this, and he has made announcements through the course of this letter, and keep in mind what the issue is. The issue is he knows there are people, and boy, you talk about a relevant subject right now. He knows there are people who are at the very brink of renouncing their faith in Christ and going back to Judaism. And his point all the way through this is, why would you do that? Why would you do this? And he talks about the superiority of Jesus in all those fronts, as far as his priesthood and his sacrifice and the sanctuary and all these parallels that he's drawn. And now he's ready for this fourth theme that the 11th chapter contains, and that is people of faith. And to do this, the first two verses, and we may not get any further than that tonight, because the first two verses to me are extremely critical. In fact, if your translation divides them up in paragraphs, the first three verses are really significant. I said the first two, but it's really the first three verses, because in this paragraph, you had a little bit of homework last week, and that was to kind of pore over these three verses and try to come up with an accurate understanding of what biblical faith is. Now, when you go back and read those, in fact, let me just read them, and then I'll ask and it's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I want you to kind of weigh in on it. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old received divine approval. By faith we understand that the world was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made out of things which do not appear. Now, don't jump ahead. Let's go back to that first verse. And there are a couple of words that I think we have to clarify, because if we're not careful, we will use our Western hemispheric background and read into these two words some ideas or synonyms that do not fit biblical faith. The two words are faith and hope. Now, give me some examples of how those words are used in everyday conversation that would not apply to the biblical definition. I hope this surge in COVID really goes away pretty quickly. Now, there's nothing wrong with that statement, but the word hope there means what? I have a strong desire. Do I know that? Do I know? No. I don't have any, extra revelation from the CDC, or I have zero medical training. So when I use it like that, I hope. What do I mean by that? Just what I said. What about faith? I think, I really believe, and you could call whatever team, whatever. I really think they're going to go to the Final Four. I've got faith in them. What does that mean? Well, I believe in them. But what is that belief founded on? Usually fanatic optimism. Okay, maybe prior experience. Yeah, I think that's crucial. Yeah, based on how they did last year, based on how they recruited. So I've got faith in them. But that's not biblical faith. What else jumps out at you about the fact that he uses these two words? But keep in mind, these are not westernized terms. But we use faith and hope in colloquial English, and I'm just saying you're going to have to park those for a moment. Those are not going to fit the template here. All right? So given that, there are two other words that the Hebrew writer incorporates that automatically set biblical faith from any wishful thinking, strong desire, optimistic intentions, and here again, translations differ. I like the NIV on verse 1 because it captures both of them. Now, faith is to be sure. RSV says assurance. It's the same thing. Faith is to be sure of things hoped for and certain. Is that what the ESV has, James? Okay. I didn't know if the ESV has that or not. Okay. So you've got two concepts here, two parts. And the first one is faith is the assurance. Faith is to be sure, but to be sure of what? It's futuristic, right? I mean, there's a future. Faith lives in the confidence of the future. That's what's meant by this idea of it's the assurance of things hoped for. It's remarkable how many times and in how many ways this is stated. And here in the 11th chapter. Abraham, verse 10, Abraham looked forward to the city which has foundations. Verse 26, Moses looked to the reward. Verse 14, people of faith are the pilgrims who are seeking a homeland. Verse 16, they look for a better country. So faith is to be certain of what? Now here again, based on our experience, this gets a little involved because the Hebrew writer says something that just doesn't seem to go together. Faith is to be sure of the future. Keith? Okay. Of things hoped for. Substance. Okay. Okay. So you've got substance and evidence paralleling surety and certainty. I like that. The realization of the. so we can kind of put all that together. Is there anything about the future we're certain of, other than death and taxes? Don't jump to that one. But think about this in our culture. Mark? Right? Exactly. Excellent. Yes, we have. Right. We have an assurance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because as Buford said, we're basing that on what? Previous experience. I mean, it came up today, came up the day before. There's no reason to think that it won't come up tomorrow. Do what? Yes, sure. So faith is, this kind of faith is certain, is sure of the future. Things that are hopeful. And a lot of that is kind of bundled up in, let's be careful about what we're hoping for. Sometimes we could be hoping for the wrong thing. So that's the first part of it. Faith is, faith lives in confidence of the future. And I don't know anywhere else. Here we are on the backside of the new year, and I haven't had time, energy, interest really in looking at some of the would-be prophets as to, they face-planted so bad last year. The would-be prophets did such a poor job this time last year, and particularly in 2020. They really, they have doubled and tripled down to the point that Kim and I were on the road last week, and I had a podcast I was listening to, and it gave snippets of some of these, Hank Kuhneman and Catherine Kirk and some of these others that were so vocal about their prophecies the last 2 years. And I listened to them, and they were so generic. I mean, I listened to it, and I thought, well, then they didn't say anything. I received. One said, I received this word from the Lord, and the word for 2022 is resurgence. Of what? Wait? What's the research? They don't tell you. And I think that's intentional. And so consequently, some aspects of the religious world, not a whole lot of confidence in the future. What about our culture? We don't have any confidence in a lot of things as far as our country is concerned. They start prognosticating that by Memorial Day weekend, gas may be bumping $4 a gallon in some parts of the country. There's no indication that inflation is going to level off. Things are going to continue to cost more. And so, no, we don't have a whole lot of confidence in the future when it comes to government, when it comes to the secular world. We just don't. But here, the writer says we have confidence. Faith is the substance. Faith is the assurance. Faith is to be sure of things hoped for. And then look at the second part. It is the conviction. It is the proof, evidence. It is the certainty. Now follow the reasoning here. It is the certainty of what? Of things not seen. How does that work? You see, the problem, the challenge is for us. It's not just here in our part of the world, but by nature, everything that we conclude, everything that we adopt is based on a couple of things. One, it's based on previous experience, and then secondly, it's based on sensory. What's the scientific method based on? Scientific method is based on anything that is touched, smelt, tasted, looked, and that can be tested. Scientific method. And somewhere along the way, and I think the people of faith were not even aware of it, or if we were, we just didn't really factor in what was really happening. At some point, certain ones in the scientific community came to the conclusion that if anything did not match up or could not be applied to the scientific method was automatically irrelevant. And since inspiration of the Scriptures would not apply to the scientific method, it was discounted, and so consequently, the virgin birth, miracles, key components of bodily resurrection of Jesus, some of the basic pillars of Christianity were just assumed to be invalid. And yet, the biblical writer here, the writer of Hebrews says, biblical faith is to be sure and is to be certain. So that tosses out this concept of, well, I think they're going to go to the Final Four. I've just got faith in them. Well, do you know that for certain? Are you sure of that? Well, no, I'm not sure of it. And I have nothing to base the certainty on. So, verse 1 automatically discounts so much of what a lot of people, I think, come to the text with and think that that's biblical faith. So let's break this down for just a few moments. It's to be sure of the future. Where else in the world are you going to have that? Nowhere. You're sure of the future, and you're certain of something you've never even seen. That's the $60,000 question. Keith asked, what's the difference between those of us who are embracing biblical faith and the folks that are just zipping down Gunter Avenue? What is the difference? I think the difference is when we fully embrace, and here again, the writer's going to help us do this. This is not some scavenger hunt that we're going to have to go around and find. He nails it, and he illustrates it. The difference is this is not something that comes overnight. It's to be sure and it's to be certain. And I don't know of two stronger concepts that he could have utilized than those two. Because if there's anything that our current world, that our culture needs, it's those two things. We need assurance and we need certainty. Because you see, I guess maybe the question that I have about some of the alternate renderings is the evidence of things not seen. Let's be careful with that, because no, I don't have firsthand evidence of a lot of things that the Bible reveals. I've never seen Jesus. God has never spoken directly to me, not that I'm aware of. I don't have any hard, tangible evidence. I can't pop in a CD and show you Jesus coming out of the tomb. So if we're going to narrow down the definition of what constitutes evidence, then no, I don't have that. But it goes beyond that. And see, what happens is a lot of times we bring secular synonyms into this biblical definition of faith, and then we start trying to apply it and it kind of falls apart. What does the existentialist mean by the term leap of faith? Existentialism, well, we're not going to delve into that too much, but at some point you can, you look at the things that you know are concrete, evidential, and then at some point the evidence runs out, and then you just gotta take a leap of faith. I'll give you a classic example of this. In fact, if I had thought quickly enough, I would have shown a clip of it, but you've seen it enough on cable and satellite. The third in the trilogy of the Harrison Ford and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Remember, in that trilogy. The third one is where they have found, the cave. It's actually Petra in Jordan, by the way. It's beautiful. And that's where the Grail is supposed to be housed. But he has 3 tests that he has to pass. And one of them, the last one, the third one, is the leap of faith. Only, and he has to look, there's this chasm, and he just has to close his eyes and just step. And of course, it turns out to be a walkway there that he didn't see. But that's the mindset. That's the leap of faith. You just throw caution to the wind, and you just blindly, is that what the writer's talking about? That's not biblical faith. Why? Because he said it's to be sure and it's to be certain. It's not some spiritual, theological crapshoot. It's not that. You remember, and I'm dating myself on this, you remember the guy, it was an old radio commercial. I would hear it when my dad would pick me up from kindergarten. We'd be going back to the house, and it was a commercial about a salesman. I think maybe he was selling Rambler cars, or that's what the commercial was about. And the guy comes up and he knocks on the door. Nobody home. I hope. Remember that one? Do you remember that? I don't know if they played it up this way. Well, that's he was doing it, but he was hoping that nobody answered the door. That's not this. Yep, that's a classic. Yeah, that's a beautiful example. And teaching your kids diving off the diving board or jumping off the side of the pool or into the lake, and you're there and you're telling them what? It's okay, I'll catch you. Don't always believe that. I had a sadistic father. No, I'm not kidding. That's not true. Woo! But the child does that based on what? Faith, but what's the faith based on? You have a level of confidence in the one that's, You say, well, he's never done that before. They've never, doesn't matter. Now, here's his proof, all right? You got it? You got the definition. 2 parts. It's to be certain, and it is to be sure, and it's to be certain. Now look at verse 2. For by it, by what? By this definition, by this kind of faith, the men of old received divine approval. And that's what's going to kind of characterize the rest of the chapter. And we want to think that the very first one out of the gate is in verse 4, by faith able. In fact, if you'll look in the following, throughout the rest of the chapter, the first part he talks about the faith of well, there are a couple of examples, but primarily the verse 8, the faith of the patriarchs. But you've got some three before the flood: Abel, Enoch, and Noah. Now, if you like me, I go through that list of the whole chapter of chapter 11, and there are some that are on his list that I would have never had on mine. And conversely, there are some that I thought, well, why didn't they make the cut? And it's not because they were perfect. It didn't matter that they were stellar, because we're going to see examples later on of individuals were not. But it's because they fit the definition. That's what the template is. And as if the writer is anticipating our struggle with it, it doesn't start with by faith Abel. It starts with whom? It starts with God himself. To illustrate the fact that there's an assurance in the future and there's a certainty of the invisible, verse 3, what does he mention? By faith, we, that's us. Third person, first person plural. By faith, we understand that the world was created. And here again, this answers that question that comes up sometimes, not necessarily about evolution. But sometimes, if you remember the hybrid that kind of came out of the apologetic world of trying to harmonize the proposed age of the earth and the account of creation in Genesis chapter 1. So the hybrid became what? What we now understand as theistic evolution. Theistic evolution. That's the biggest oxymoron you could ever come up with, because there is nothing theistic about evolution. Theistic evolution basically says God used the evolutionary process as a vehicle. That would take care of everything. Well, it would, except for one problem. One, you have the account in Genesis chapter 1, and then you have not only here, but even the psalmist said the same thing that the Hebrew writer said here, and that is God created by what? By his word. I mean, this is his stellar example of biblical faith. How so? So that what is seen was made out of things that what? That we don't see. You hear it all the time. Well, God created the world from nothing. There it is. But have you ever thought about how creation is the first example of biblical faith? God said, I'm even going to model it for you. I'm going to illustrate it. I'm going to speak things into existence out of nothing. Mark? Yes. Exactly. Right. And that's where it kind of jumps the tracks for a lot of people, because no, I don't have a DVD of Jesus walking out of the tomb. No. Right. And that's why, to date, here we are at 7:16 on a Wednesday night, and I know I'm rehashing this because we've talked about this before. Why, if we are now, if the secular world steeped in moral relativism is the pinnacle, if it's the way to go, why are they still leveling attacks at anything that smack of a spiritual nature? They're constantly, there's no let up. And here's my point with that. Okay, if the Bible is mythical, what are you worried about? Leave it alone. Quit worrying about it. Why you got to constantly bash it in the media and bash it in Hollywood? And just ignore it if there's nothing to it. I kind of liken it to, and I don't know the state of where the Supreme Court is on this case, this abortion case out of Mississippi. And here again, maybe there's more to this than I don't fully grasp. But if the whole constitutional concept of abortion is if it's such solid legislation, then let's do something we've never done. Let's put it up for a vote. You realize we never got to vote on that, right? Collectively as a nation. States have. But if it's based on solid, legal grounds, put it up for a vote. What do you got to worry about? If it was a great idea in 1973 and it's still, let everybody vote on it. See, we did that, rightfully so. We did that with other things. But for some reason, that's kind of hands off. And my point is, the secularist, the moral relativist are scared to death. Because it's a matter of, okay, what if we're wrong? I've actually talked to people about, to what Mark's point about biblical evidence. Okay, but what if I'm wrong? It's all right. No harm, no foul. Exactly. But what if you're wrong? So anticipating this, the biblical writer says, by faith what? By faith we understand. That's the first one. By faith. What kind of faith? The very kind of faith that God himself modeled. How did God model it? Because he modeled an assurance in the future and a certainty of things created out of nothing. And to your point, Mark, one of the greatest evidences of this is creation. One of the strongest evidences of this. So I find that really rather compelling, that when we start looking, beginning next week, we'll start looking at this list of all these folks that made the cut on this great hall of, faithful hall of this hall of the faithful. But it doesn't start with Abel. It starts with God himself. And God models this biblical faith. And these other people that we're going to see, they model it because of those two components. And read on ahead, and we'll try to work through this without taking a whole lot of time, but can't make any promises. How many of you have faith that I will do that? Something's up, Kurt.